Can Mick Cronin and the Bruins navigate the first weekend into weekend 2? And are the UCLA women being disrespected from everybody asking for a 1 seed? Yeah.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever it's your podcast and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. It's your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Go check it out on FanDuel.com. Where we get started today, though, UCLA, is it possible that they can get through Utah State, where they'll be favored, get against a 2 seed in Tennessee, beat them, and the next thing you know, well, traveling all that way, will they be headed to Indianapolis to get to the Midwest Final? All right. Can they go from West Coast to Kentucky and then go all the way back to Indianapolis for another trip to the state of Indiana? It's certainly doable, but what's it going to take for UCLA to do it? All right. Maybe you're a hater and you're sitting there and it's like, okay, UCLA couldn't beat the one Mountain West opponent. They actually got outplayed for 40 minutes when UCLA played New Mexico. New Mexico won the Mountain West outright. Colorado State won the tournament. Utah State's been that team that's didn't need to win the conference tournament, is good friends with Mick Cronin, and got themselves into the tournament. Utah State actually has more players with tournament experience from last year's victory over TCU and then beatdown loss to Purdue than UCLA has on their current roster, if you think about it. So where does that leave UCLA? All right, we're not even talking Tennessee yet. We're not even navigating that second game. A Utah State team that can shoot some threes, can score right after the Bruins got themselves boat raced out of the Big Ten tournament by Wisconsin. Now, what's the positive? What are the positives in all that? Where UCLA against a team that was in a similar conference to a team that already beat them down. You've got matchups that maybe don't favor them, the location, the timing of it all. Well, here's what UCLA has got. One of the best defenses at forcing turnovers in the country. I'm assuming Mick Cronin is not going to play the same type of defense against the Aggies, against the three-point line, like they did against Wisconsin. You could argue Mick Cronin, especially after the press conference when the seeds were released, the bracket was released, Mick Cronin seemed happy to go home. He wanted nothing to do with being at the Big Ten tournament. You could argue he kind of left Wisconsin open and said, if they make it, let them make it. If not, then we will win and we'll play another day. But UCLA looked like they truly didn't want to be there against Wisconsin. All right. Mick Cronin maybe game plan that way. I don't know. Maybe he's not going to admit that. But sometimes you don't throw everything out there, right? You're not going to throw out your crazy defenses. You want to rile the team up. You want to get their competitive juices going. You want to beat down so you get them frustrated, and then you can get them to focus during practice leading up to the Utah State game. Okay, that's coaching 101. That's the mental guru part. That's the battle Cronin is playing with us, the media, the fans, the players themselves, making sure he doesn't reveal anything scheme-wise. He's going to be coaching against somebody who he considers to be a dear friend, who apparently he helped talk and give some advice to Calhoun about the contract extension he's trying to work with Utah State, because Utah State's been losing coaches left and right, and they're still going to the NCAA tournament. In my mind, the best comp for Utah State, maybe not right now team-wise, but if you want like an image, if you want like a team-wide image as to what Utah State could be, my thought is think of St. Mary's, right? Both western side of the United States, West Coast for St. Mary's. Utah State and St. Mary's are that same bubble, all right? Now, St. Mary's got blasted in the first round last year. Utah State got a victory in the NCAA tournament. But in my mind, those teams are similar. They're hovering around as high as the 5, usually 6, 7 range, to the 10 range like Utah State is right now. A team that could get win in a tournament, but is probably not going to go deep, all right? It's still a tricky matchup if UCLA fails, if they have a cold shooting day. If Utah State's guards get red hot and Cronin watches UCLA get out rebounded by the 6'11", 7-foot front that Utah State can pose, and that's pretty big. Those are pretty stellar players in the post Utah State has. For a Mountain West team, that's pretty good. Okay. But the thing is, if it's in my mind, if it's like a Utah State St. Mary's comp, maybe not directly back and forth, you're not going to say they're the same team. But if you're like, what's the branding? What would be the best way to brand Utah State? I would think similar to a St. Mary's, where I'm not sure they'd go deep in the tournament, but UCLA is certainly capable of beating them. They're very capable of losing. And if UCLA has a late lead, I'm scared more if they're up 10 with 3 minutes to play than if it's a 2-point game with 2 minutes to play. UCLA, in games decided by 5 or less, they play really well. Now they like to choke some leads and turn them into blown leads, but those are games where UCLA is up big and just blew it late. Not a game that was back and forth, close, late, that they pulled away to escape. Even the team in 2022 had to struggle in the first round, and then they found themselves going to the Sweet 16. In 2021, UCLA is an 11 seed, had to fight through Michigan State, come back and get to overtime to win that game, get some help from Abilene Christian, beat BYU in the first round. It's not like UCLA is always playing their best in the conference tournament heading into the NCAA tournament. Cronin is clearly jaded from losing Jalen Clark, losing Aday Mara, seeing some guys twist some ankles in the Pac-12 tournament or the Pac-12 regular season finales. And this year, with what's been a war of attrition, traveling, mostly being healthy, the norovirus that kind of hurt them a bit after the Michigan State win, injuries earlier in the year that cost them games against Nebraska, a game against North Carolina. The reason North Carolina's in the field is because they beat UCLA, and Eric Daly Jr. was hurt. If the committee bothered to look at that, they would have known, I don't think North Carolina is the most deserving. Anyways, UCLA has one of the most dominant defenses at preventing points. Take the Wisconsin game out. Pretty good at forcing turnovers. And they've got a special center in Aday Mara. They've got an athletic backup, and they can also play small. Cronin can rotate how he wants his lineup, and the best rotation I've seen Cronin work with is when Mata's out there with Bilodeau, when Mata's out there with Daly, and they can play Bilodeau and Daly Jr. together. Because that's going to happen. We will be frustrated when Mata probably doesn't start. He probably should against Utah State. He won't, and UCLA is going to hold him back. Now, against the physical front that Tennessee is, the dominant SEC school, yada, 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 UCLA is going to have their work cut out for them against Utah State first. But it is very doable. And I still expect UCLA to beat Utah State. That's a fair statement to say. Now, how can they get to a second weekend by beating Tennessee? Is it doable? Is it going to take a choke from Tennessee? Is this the same team that was going deep in the tournament with Dalton Connect, now Los Angeles Laker, turned trade piece back into Los Angeles? What's going on? It is doable. But is it realistic? We'll talk about it next on Locked On UCLA. Eating healthy doesn't need to be complicated. With Factor, you can get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes so you can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. These Factor meals, they arrive fresh. They're never frozen. 40-plus options with 8 dietary preferences each week. And you can customize your menu to fit your specific goals. Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto, just to name a few. You're sitting there, you're watching some tournament games. You're like, I want a good meal that's healthy for me. Maybe you don't want to go get some fast food. Well, you got Factor meals right here, and you're just, let me go heat this up during a long commercial break. That's what Factor can do, give you nutritious, convenient meals that they also offer smoothies, breakfast, snacks. So you're like, man, I'm going to watch games all day. Get a smoothie, eat that big meal for lunch, and then the next day have that for dinner as well. Super tasty. You can eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast. Use the code FactorPodcast. Get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's the code FactorPodcast at factormeals.com/FactorPodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. That's Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. A super easy to use website, helpful resources, latest product info, where you can get the job done right. A complete inventory, over 200,000 plus parts and over 400 plus top brands. You'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, There's expert support with industry-leading service. You can always talk to a real person with Supply House. And maybe you're a trade pro. You want that extra edge. A free Trade Master program with exclusive perks like dedicated phone lines, free shipping, discounts in every order. Thousands of skilled professionals have already taken advantage. So this is what you got to do. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Use the code SH and the number 5, SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Okay, so it's fair enough for UCLA to be expected to reach the second round, right? I'm looking analytically beyond just the matchup. UCLA right now is 65% expectation for them to beat Utah State, get to the round of 32. Okay, that's cool. What's the likelihood UCLA reaches the Sweet 16? Well, what's funny is that UCLA has a 20% chance of reaching the Sweet 16. Gonzaga, the 8th seed, has a 22% chance of reaching the Sweet 16. So they're expecting Gonzaga to beat Georgia, okay, and then have a better chance of them beating Houston than UCLA does of Tennessee. Interesting. Gonzaga has the better odds than UCLA does of reaching the Elite 8 and double the odds of reaching the Final Four. That's crazy, way down the line. So Tennessee is almost, if not equal or better than Houston at getting to the Sweet 16 and deeper in the NCAA tournament. So Gonzaga, it's funny to see how the 8th seed theoretically has better odds than UCLA. The 7th seed, where you could argue Utah State is a favorable matchup for the Bruins. And then going against the 2 seed Tennessee, reading what Jay Billis, an ESPN expert, has UCLA losing to Utah State. So there's just a lot of expectation the Bruins might not get out of the first round. And that's a fair quote. That's a fair thought for this UCLA team. You're like, man, there's no true guard play. But Sky Clark can get hot from 3. You can mix in some Sebastian Mack drives. Stefanovic and Kobe Johnson are big-time X factors, either off the bench or defensively. And then the unknown is Dylan Andrews. If he plays extremely well and great defense, the Bruins could find themselves on a run. So the pro for UCLA going into Tennessee, anybody can step up and the UCLA Bruins can win that game. You look at teams in the top of the bracket. UCLA's beaten Michigan State. They've been physical against the Spartans. They've beaten Oregon, who is a team that's very well thought of. Against Michigan, even though the Bruins lost that game by 19 points, there was a stretch with less than 10 minutes to go against the Wolverines, who won the Big Ten tournament, that UCLA was competing, that they were a team that had a chance to go and take the lead when Michigan was in foul trouble. And that was pre-Aday Mara. There's just a whole lot of things that UCLA can go their way because the Bruins do have players who can make shots when they're face guarded really tough. It just hasn't been consistent to where we think over 6 games, over 3 weekends, that's going to happen. But I've looked back at North Carolina in the 22 run. They didn't expect that to happen for North Carolina. UCLA in the 21 run. Okay. NC State last year as an 11 seed getting to the Final Four where they needed to win the ACC tournament. Is it likely we see a crazy March? Is this a year where we see all the top seeds go chalk? Right? I was looking and seeing all the ESPN people going 1 seed versus 2 seed Elite 8. 1 seed, 2 seed or such in the Final Four. And I just think this year, as good as those top teams are, they're still beatable. And UCLA has proven they can compete. Now, have they been able to travel east and win those neutral site games? No, but it's not like they were blown out in Madison Square Garden against North Carolina. They had a huge lead. Against Minnesota, one of their worst losses. They were up 17. So in some of the worst losses, UCLA has found themselves a little sleepy and blown big leads. I think this year, the Bruins will be focused. Their focus wasn't truly there in the Big Ten tournament. Wisconsin wanted to beat them, had a lights-out shooting day from downtown, like red hot. As dangerous as it gets, Tennessee doesn't have that. Utah State does not have that ability. Neither one of those teams, in my mind, are going to come out there and hit 19 threes. Where UCLA has the advantage of it can be a physical game. They would love a low-scoring physical game, which they could get into with Tennessee. And you mix in Aday Mara, who these teams have not seen a first or second time, right? When Mata comes in, The only time he wasn't truly dominant against Wisconsin was because they were coached up, scouted it against Mara, and he dominated against the Badgers the first time. They had a good game plan, and I'm not sure that a team that hasn't faced Aday once before or twice before is going to have the same type of success guarding him defensively. Now, to get him the basketball is one thing. To get him his 15, 20-plus minutes where the Bruins are unbeaten, cool. Although if UCLA did play him 15 to 20 minutes against Wisconsin, they would have suffered their first loss. Mara, I don't think, is so easily scouted because he's done well against teams who are wondering, is he going to get in? Is this a guy that he will dominate? While Wisconsin, who had seen him before, had a really good game plan. I just don't see Tennessee, Utah State having those same type of game plans, and as long as Cronin plays him, or William Kyle, because I like the lineup where they're both out there. I liked them when William Kyle's out there. Mick Cronin's going to have to lean at some point on some Kyle minutes and a lot on Aday Mara minutes. Does that come at the expense of Tyler Bilodeau? That's okay for UCLA. Does it come at the expense of Eric Daly Jr.? When UCLA's had some of their worst games, Eric Daly Jr. has not shot the ball all too well in their losses to North Carolina and Nebraska, was injured and out, was wearing the mask against Rutgers. So some of those losses, those puzzling early Big Ten losses, have come when certain guys are a little bit banged up. You mix in the travel, you mix in the fires, and then you have the norovirus with all that later in the season. Explainable, but then it doesn't seem maybe like I'm convincing you if you're sitting here like, man, Zach, you're piping in sunshine. And it was raining today in Southern California. I hear you. They could get embarrassed by Tennessee, but it's not impossible. It is certainly not impossible to see this team get in the Sweet 16. My thing is, if UCLA wins one, they're not going to be done after weekend one. If they win the first one, I think they're getting hot. That is just my thought. Get them early, or UCLA is going on a run. It's kind of a weird in between. You could see them, all right, if they survive Utah State, if they get confident, they shoot well, there's limited preparation. I know coaches have their scouts. They're going to have a coach on a UCLA. They'll have a coach on a Utah State. UCLA will have one on Utah State, Tennessee, and dare I say Wofford if they pull off the 2-15 upset. Better yet, if they do that, that would be huge. If UCLA wins the first one, I'm not confident, but I'd be excited about the chances of UCLA going against a potentially overrated SEC school. Now, it's a tough bracket, a lot of traveling, less travel for Tennessee, but the Bruins didn't play into a tournament final on a Sunday. Tennessee has 3 days off, including getting beat down by Florida. That doesn't always result in success. If you look at the Big Ten tournament, sometimes one or the other, the winner or the loser of the Big Ten tournament championship, has been vulnerable to going down early. They play so late in the weekend. They play right before Selection Sunday. There's no point for the Big Ten to be playing tournament basketball right before Selection Sunday when it doesn't affect the seeding, a la Michigan. For the Bruins, they've got the rest. They got their beatdown. I do not think a team is going to come at them like Wisconsin did in the Big Ten quarterfinal. I just do not think so. I don't think Tennessee will. Nobody's going to come at them with the mission to beat them, something to prove. And Wisconsin was already playing a game the day before and got red hot the next day. UCLA has positives going forward. They can navigate it. And I think if they win game one, they can win game two, and they will win game two. But it's surviving those and making sure you get the matchups in your right way, and they play defense. If they turned over less than 10 times, UCLA is most likely in that game. I don't think they'll shoot as coldly as they did against Wisconsin. They won't give up 19 threes. One of the two games this year, UCLA has been blown out. In the majority of their losses, they have been competitive. And of course, in some of their best wins, UCLA and Tennessee have an equal amount of quad one wins if you take out the conference tournament. If you take out Tennessee's quad one wins in the conference tournament, UCLA and Tennessee have the same amount of quad one wins. That means UCLA's got some strong road, neutral site wins against Oregon, Arizona, Gonzaga, who right now actually has better odds of making it to the Final Four of the Sweet 16 than UCLA does, which is crazy. Gonzaga have to go through the 1 seed Houston. People aren't even believing UCLA get to the second round. And that's exactly where Mick Cronin wants them. Doubted and not disappointing, but hey, they're not on anybody's radar, which is exactly where they're at. Not on anybody's radar. And that's where I think the Bruins can be their most dangerous. They're certainly vulnerable, This is a way where they can light the fire and the Bruins will be ready to play. I can guarantee it. Does it result in victory? We'll find out. But they're not making true Big Ten road games anymore. These are neutral site games, and I think that'll make a big difference in UCLA moving forward, potentially in the tournament. Speaking of moving forward, I think Dawn Staley in South Carolina got to get off this mental game. I think USC mad. UCLA should be disrespected. Why would anybody think South Carolina should have the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament on the women's side? I think that's just ludicrous. Let's talk about it next on Locked On UCLA. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. New customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters, Cinderellas, or the Bruins. Who's going to cut down the nets? Use it all when you go check out FanDuel. And hey, the tournament games are going to be happening almost every day starting on Tuesday. Every day, all the time. This is great. And if you're staying in on the action, the FanDuel app is super easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There is no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
We're going to wrap things up here on the Locked On UCLA podcast. UCLA, the number 1 overall seed. You talk about the favors that weren't given towards the men's bracket. On the women's bracket, UCLA got the number 1 overall seed, even though the easiest path to the Final Four, I think, is South Carolina. I think South Carolina got a very good bracket for them to coast through those first few rounds. Indiana could give them trouble like they did last year late in the NCAA tournament. This year, maybe early threes and an early barrage by Indiana could throw South Carolina off their game. Unlikely. UCLA should be able to coast until the Elite Eight. That is the expectation, and that's when the going gets tough. Are they going to play LSU, or is LSU going to get upset because they're injured? Is it, what's going to go on with UCLA, LSU, NC State? I think UCLA is destined for a Final Four. First one in program history in the NCAA tournament. But then you sit there and you got a mental game being played by Dawn Staley. And it's like, I'm frustrated. She's frustrated because, her team didn't get the 1 overall seed. Whoever didn't watch that game in November should go back and watch the tape because UCLA beat down the Gamecocks. UConn went to Columbia and beat down South Carolina. USC beat UConn. And how is USC the 4th number 1 seed? How is UConn a 2 seed? Texas is embarrassing for them to be a 1 seed. I can understand South Carolina. South Carolina claiming to be the number 1 overall team in the country. People voting for them to be the number 1 overall team in the country. When they're at best, South Carolina at their best right now is maybe number 4 in the country. The way the ranking should have gone, it could have been a toss-up for me between UCLA, UConn, and USC. Any one of those teams is the top number 1 overall seed. It's fair. South Carolina acting like they have a claim is completely crazy. I do not understand anybody who thinks South Carolina has a chance. Against 2 of the biggest teams, the biggest names in the sport this season, they got beat down twice. They're different. Okay, Texas SEC is overrated, just like it's on the men's, on the women's. Overrated. South Carolina can go on a run. They have an easy bracket, in my mind, to go into the Final Four. I just don't see how they match up with the team who they play in the Final Four. Is that it could be the likes of Texas. I don't even think Texas gets to the Final Four. I think Notre Dame's there. I don't even think if South Carolina gets in the championship game, you can mix in UCLA. You can mix in somebody else, some other team. I don't even think they win it this year. I think they're one of the 4, 5, 6 best teams in the country. I just don't understand it. But that's how the great coaches do it, right? They get you angry. Because think about it a couple years ago. Think of the college football playoff national championship game. When Georgia beat TCU and Kirby Smart had done something similar where he convinced his Georgia Bulldog players that everybody doubted Georgia. And everybody's like, no. We expected you to go back-to-back. You dominated. TCU was this underdog who doubted Georgia. This is the same thing Dawn Staley is using to motivate her team. They doubt you. They don't believe in you going deep. And, in my mind, I am doubting to a certain point. That's after 4 wins in the NCAA tournament, proving you're one of the 4 to 5 to 2 to 3 best teams in the country, which I acknowledge they pretty much are. I just don't understand where anybody could realistically rank them higher than UCLA, than USC, than UConn. Against Texas, sure. If Notre Dame hadn't lost all those games and gotten cold at the end of the year, even maybe the 5th best team in the country. But, of course, Notre Dame slid at the end of the year in the ACC tournament, heading into the rest of their ACC play. So South Carolina is the number 2 overall seed. Better bracket than UCLA to get to the Final Four. But I do like UCLA having a 1 seed where they're going to have a coast to the Elite 8. UConn or USC will be knocked out. Slight chance that both of them are, unlikely. And remember, UCLA coming off a win against USC in the Big Ten tournament final. UCLA against UConn last year. Although that wasn't the healthiest UConn team, I think UCLA is deeper this year than they were last year. Of course, UConn is too. They've got a freshman. They've got Fudd. They've got Paige Beckers. That would be a superstar Final Four. I'm not entirely sure if USC, a team who certainly got screwed with UConn being a 2 seed in their bracket, already beating them at UConn, and they got to play them on a neutral floor just to get to the Final Four again, or get to the Final Four and beat UConn again. UCLA was done favors. Number 1 overall seed, pretty solid bracket heading into that 3rd or 4th game. And now this is where Corey Close got to make her money. You got Dawn Staley playing games. You got Lindsey Gottlieb, who's like, dude, I never thought I'd be frustrated with the 1 seed. You got Gino, who I'm not sure if I've heard anything, but he's like, all right, we'll use this as motivation. They'll make their way up, and they can use the slight as a 1 seed. Like, oh, USC's ticked off. We should be the number 2 or 3 or 1 overall seed. UConn should be the angriest out of anybody. UCLA got some favors, but it does get tough starting with their 3rd to 4th game in the NCAA tournament. Now, they still got to make sure they don't get upset in those first few rounds. The Bruins are just so much better. We've seen them fight through Baylor already before. We've seen them survive even an early scare in the NCAA tournament last year in the 2nd round when Creighton nearly upset the Bruins. Would have been devastating if UCLA had fallen short. I think this team is motivated. They're ready to go. And with how they survived the Big Ten tournament, how they played and dominated, UCLA, in my mind, Corey Close with Lauren Betts, the most unstoppable force in the paint, an All-American point guard. You've got multiple 3-point shooting options and a lot of depth pieces that can play backup point guard, that can get buckets, can get rebounds. They're just unheralded at the moment and can shoot a little bit in some aspects, get buckets when the rest of the Bruins are cold. I just don't understand why people are sleeping on the Bruins to go on a run as the best team in the country like they've been in my mind the whole year. And if they avoid SC for the 4th time, watch out. UConn is tough. South Carolina, they're all tough. But UCLA has already proven that if you're not going to shoot the ball really well and you don't have that dominant center, who is going to beat them? Who? Tell me who. USC is certainly capable, but I'm not confident they're getting out of their own regional to face UCLA in a potential Final Four round 4 because they got screwed with UConn in there. And UConn, just as good, got screwed by being put into USC's Elite 8 quadrant just to get to the Final Four. So UCLA got some favors. I'm excited. And Dawn Staley in South Carolina are playing the mental game. She's doing it well. It's ridiculous when people are sitting there like, South Carolina, how are they not the number 1? Charlie Cream, how are they not the number 1 overall seed? Because it's clear that they weren't the number 1 overall team in the country. Ridiculous. I could go on a rant. I've already done so already. We'll get into more specific matchups, right? The UCLA women, they wait for UC San Diego and Southern to play, and that's who they'll host at Pauley Pavilion. For the men, we'll dive in deeper into the Utah State matchup and talk in a little bit of spring football with Pro Day and some spring sports as well. In addition, who is one player UCLA must go after in the late class of 2025 for Mick Cronin? We'll talk about all that next on Locked On UCLA in future episodes. So stick here with this podcast on this run in March Madness. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.